creations. Our next panel will discuss collaborating for innovation in sustainability and climate tech. And I'd like to invite our panelists and moderator up on the stage. Up first, Swapna Gupta, partner Avana Capital. Please put your hands together. Thank you. Mridula Ramesh, founder Sundaram Climate Institute. Mridula unfortunately could not join us in person, but she's going to join us online through Zoom, and she'll be up with us in just a bit. Ankit Agarwal, founder Fool.co. And this session is going to be moderated by the absolutely jovial and bubbly Anand Shri Ganesh, COO of NSRCEL. Please put your hands together for Ganesh. Thank you. Over to you, Ganesh.
This is an interesting panel. I am stepping in for Shreyash Tribulal, who is the founder CEO of Mycelio Mobility, of M2, of Numero Motors, a true pioneer in the mobility space. His interests cut across investing in the sustainability space, last mile logistics, manufacturing, shared engineering for the EV space. He's a true pioneer in the space. He's unfortunately stuck in traffic because of interesting things happening in the city. But we will rally the troops here. There are other rallies happening elsewhere. To my panelists, I think the conversation for today is to put a lens on, while the founders within the climate tech sustainability spaces, people like you, are trying to solve for these priorities at scale. What is the role that the ecosystem is playing? What is the role of maybe industry, policy, investors like yourself and Mridula, maybe science and technology, R&D and research labs, maybe incubators like us. What is the role that the ecosystem is playing in enabling the journey of the entrepreneur? But more critically, is the ecosystem stepping up to solve for the priorities that are pretty much a crisis now? And we'll try and spend the next half an hour or so putting some spotlight on that. Maybe Swapna, I'll start with you. If you could give a little bit of perspective to Avana Capital and probably the work that you're doing from the perspective of bringing together a collaborative environment for the ecosystem.
Absolutely, and it's a pleasure to be in a panel with Ganesh. This is my third in last 3 months, so now we're almost family.
This is very embarrassing. Thank you.
So I think people don't understand the enormity of India as a country, right? We are home to 1.4 billion people, 20% of the world population. I don't think you can build in silo here. It is just stupid to think that you can start a company tomorrow, or you can open a fund tomorrow, or you can put a government policy and things will work, right? It's just not going to happen. The reason is, just like it takes a village to raise a child, it's the same analogy here. I think to get anything working in the country, you need to work and operate alongside. Us at Avana, when we started Avana, all of us come from deep investing, operating, being in the ecosystem background for many years now. And I have seen really the startup journey from the time there were 0 unicorns on paper, whatever that means, scale, but today 100 plus, but really shows how the economy has scaled. And what is clearly visible is the startups nation that we see today in India is a function of the investors, the public, the policy, everyone coming together. If you think about climate space, right? Climate is a huge space. The reason a lot of us are here in this space today doing what we are doing is it is the next big problem statement. It needs to be solved for. You can think about solving for 10 other things, but if there is no planet, there is really nothing. So you need to solve for it. So that's table stakes, right? And while you're solving for it, I think it's important to think about what value does each stakeholder bring to this. If I think about an entrepreneur, we know corporates are sleeping at the wheel. They are dinosaurs, they won't move forward. So startups are really needed to move the needle forward on innovation. And Ankit and other entrepreneurs, if they're not there, I think none of us will exist in some sense, right? Investors are equally important because, well, you need capital to move that scale forward. I think the third key piece in this ecosystem is policy. And I actually think that I have never seen a better, more progressive policy than there could be, right? If you think about EV ecosystem in the country today, and Mycelio is a sponsor, mobility is a big theme here. I think what we see that 10 years back, electric vehicle, if you thought about it, nobody would even touch it in India, right? People would think, really, electric vehicle, India, what are you really thinking? And today, 10 years hence, every child sees a green board on the road, says, oh my God, it's an electric vehicle. Can we get one, right? So that's how the narrative has shifted. And a lot of it is because of the government push that we have seen across the board. And these are anecdotal examples, but they happen across sector where you've seen a lot of government push to get it going. The fourth key piece is academia, actually, which a lot of us don't realize, but a lot of institutions are also working towards this and seeding those thoughts, those ideas in various forums to ensure that a lot of innovation is moving forward in terms of think tanks, policy bodies, etc. So in my mind, I as an Avana cannot be a fund or build for climate tech if the other ecosystems did not exist.
That's powerful, Swapna. I want to bounce that, Ankit, with you. She started by saying we are solving for problems at 1.4 billion scale. And one of the priorities and challenges within this space is for founders to scale. In your own journey with Fool, what's been the role of your partners, other stakeholders, collaborators over the past few years?
Okay, so without the partners or the the key stakeholders, and I consider the consumer or the customers as the biggest key stakeholders. If they wouldn't be there, then we wouldn't have existed. That's one. Second is, one thing that I would add to what Swapna said is the role of the scientific community in this whole climate change ecosystem, because as a country, we've got very deep assets in terms of research with BIRAC, NCBS, and other institutions, which I think entrepreneurs or the public at large are not able to exploit or explore enough and bring them to market. Essentially, if that could happen at a more accelerated pace, then there will be a lot more climate innovations from India. As of now, we are majorly dependent on a lot of components on China or the Western world, which will again change. So there is that inherent belief that a lot like breakthrough science cannot happen in India. So that needs to change.
But in your own journey, you worked with academia.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. So we were trying to make animal-free, like animals leather, substitute to animal leather from waste flowers. In the beginning, 1 or 2 years, every single person laughed at this idea. There was not a single person who could like really say, yes, this is even possible in dreams. So even institutions, government institution, everyone would laugh at this. Now when it has come to there is a MVP, there's product. Now people want to see, oh, is there revenue on it? So that is a very deep inherent Indian mindset in terms of any innovation that comes out of India. Now if the same thing comes out of the US, people are doing this. So that needs to inherently change and we need to look inwards, that's one. So there are innovations, there are a lot of ecosystem players, there are a lot of supporters who are there in the system. But we need to be really open to exploit those and get those advantages to get to the next stage.
Interesting. Mridula ma'am, you're able to hear us? Awesome. Opening comments from you, from your own perspective. You've been in the space for a while. And from the work that the Sundaram Climate Institute has done, what's been the role of, and what's the role that you played, experienced in seeing how the ecosystem comes together to solve for some of these?
First, thank you for inviting me. Sorry I couldn't be there in person. And I hope there's not an echo.
We're good.
Okay, great. So, it's a pleasure to be on the panel, invested in both Avana and in Ankit. So, it's nice to see them both up on stage. Look, we've come a long way, and I think Swapna spoke about that. I think it's sometimes quite, in the last year, my head is spinning round and round because that's how fast climate tech is moving. When I started investing, and yes, I'm a dinosaur, I started doing this a fairly long time ago. In 2015, I think, I would be lucky if I saw one deal because despite, even apart from being a dinosaur, I remember when I started, I said, I'm going to do adaptation-based startups. So that was even more of sort of filter I put on. And if I saw one deal a quarter, that was considered a good quarter. I'm seeing, several startups a week now. So it's breathtaking. The sector has moved breathtakingly fast. On your so that is in terms of opening comments, and I think anybody who doesn't participate in this sector in whichever shape or form is really missing out on an enormous opportunity, right? So that is my opening comment. But on cooperation, here's the thing, and it's been alluded to by both the other panelists. See, let's take policy and science together, right? We need, there are certain parts of the climate tech ecosystem which are moving very far ahead of certain others, electric mobility being case in point. But, when you look at the climate problem more holistically, things like water, getting agriculture more resilient, things like managing solid waste are not moving quite so fast. So clearly there needs to be scientific input saying, look, we need this solved. This is how some of the solutions can work, which then feed into policy, which then feed into, startups, innovating, investors investing. And it's not a linear process. Someone like Ankit will go try something out saying, okay, look, this is working, this is not, go back to science, go back to policymakers, and sort of get that non-linear circular loop going, which is happening in EV, but needs to happen more in some of the other sectors. The other ecosystem player that needs to get involved big time, and they are involved, but I think there needs to be tighter coordination, is the philanthropic grant-making organizations, right? Many of my startups rely on grants to grow because they are creating social impact, they are creating climate resilience, etc. Not just my startups, many startups in this space. But, I know founders who are tearing their hair out because they're getting very conflicting messages from their equity investors, from their grant holders, and sometimes from other parties. And I think we need the founders. They're the people with boots on the ground solving the problem. So I think it's up to us, the investors and the grant making institutions and investors in different stage. So I invest in pre-seed and seed. So Avana would come in at the next level. We need to be, it's like a relay race. We need to hand over the baton very carefully so that we don't give conflicting messages to the founders, because that's the surest way of killing founders and not making climate impact at all. I'll stop there.
Boatload of points there. Maybe I'm going to see if we can pick them in some order and see where we land. One of the things that Mridula pointed about, and I'll point this to Swapna, is the access to capital. And while we've experienced some scale up, at least there is still some perception that this space is still very capital starved. And that might be probably because the knowledge of the ecosystem is weak, or the understanding of risk return from an investor's perspective is weak. What is your sense? What will it take to at least start with solve for capital?
Absolutely agree. I think there's no denying that this space needs much more capital to the tunes of trillions of dollars, and we're just scratching the surface. The reason we also started Avana is I was a deep tech investor, and deep tech is really thinking about the next big problems to solve, right? And as I was doing that, I also saw a lot of global VCs. I'm part of huge networks where there are a lot of global VCs, and there's so much happening in US, Europe. And then you start looking at India and you feel you're still scratching the surface. And the question is why? The question is why is because people understand and have been investing in sectors which are consumer, enterprise, D2C brands for now 10 years, 10, 20 years, right? And they understand those spaces, they have made money. Now, when you think about climate tech, it's also, in a way now, a new version of what used to be clean tech, and a lot of people have burned their hands. So clean tech 1.0, everyone burned their hands. When you think about climate tech, a lot of people will end up asking you, well, can you really create impact and profit at the same time, right? So a lot of people still come from the school that I don't think this space will make money. This space is still about impact, right? So you need to change that. a lot of global stakeholders, which is where most of capital is, and that's a fact, right? Global capital needs to flow for the market to become deep enough. We'll talk about how it's more about emissions versus, like Mridula was pointing out, adaptation and resilience. Those spaces are still not being thought about globally. So that capital doesn't show up, right? So how do you get that narrative going that, look, India is a hotbed of innovation, we all agree. There are great companies coming out in climate tech, but they can actually create huge pools of profit while creating impact. I think that narrative, if we are able to get it right, which is what we are trying to do.
Who would take the leadership there? I mean, someone has to bell the cat.
Yeah, so I mean, I could say that no one is doing it, which is why we started it. And in fact, last week we had a very interesting conversation with someone. We, of course, like Mridula is an investor in us. We also need to go rally global capital to invest in us so we can invest in startups. And one of the conversations we had with someone was, you guys are doing all the hard work, and then 10 other funds will show up, which is actually great, which is what is needed for the ecosystem, that more people start talking about it, more capital shows up. But you're right, capital today is very, very, I think it's still a trickle, if I could.
Mridula, I want to bounce that off you because you also mentioned this earlier when you spoke, your opening comments about the role of an early stage investor and a late stage institutional investor, and just creating enough momentum from capital availability, whether it's philanthropy or grant or early stage or institutional. And one part of what Swapna is talking about sounds a little utopian. Is it possible for a set of investors to come together to create change in the space? How do you see that collaboration playing out, whether by stage or by type or by narrative?
I'm struggling here because there's a heck of a lot of echo. There's a lot of echoing. So I'm going to try and rephrase the question so I know I'm understanding you correctly. You're saying, how do you collaborate? Is it? I heard Swapna say there's not enough capital coming in, right? And then Ganesh, you said, how do you collaborate? Is it by narrative? Is it by sector? Is that the question you're asking?
In that direction, an investor
Sorry?
perspective to bringing capital together, creating a shared vision.
Okay. I'm going to try my best to answer the question given the echo issue. See, I think let me just talk about what happens on when I start investing, and I invest with a bunch of other angel investors, many of whom don't have a climate background, right? So what is the catalyst that is required to unlock the checkbooks? And very often it's narrative and it's a little bit of credibility. Because when a startup comes and says, makes their pitch and says, here is the problem I'm trying to solve, here is my business model, here is my moat. And it's a lot of other investors, I had this in the last startup I was there. They're like, well, this is a social cause. I'm not sure this will make money. And it really, one of the things that I did in that meeting is saying, look, there is one of the very exciting developments in this space is the evolution of carbon credits. Again, I think Swapna mentioned that, there has been people have been stung by this. So carbon credits has come and gone, and a lot of people have not made any money on it. But this time it seems to be coming, and there's a lot of uncertainty on how it will evolve. But I think at some point you will start to see the space evolve, and by 2030 it will start becoming, it will add an entirely new value stream within this investing space. Right, to make that point, once you make that point to an investor, which sometimes, the startups just need that additional narrative push from an investor to say, look, this does make sense. This is exciting. This space will grow. And that sort of gets the capital unlocked, that gets the checkbooks unlocked. And I see that happen time and time again in the investments that we've made in just this year. I won't even go to the last year. And the other thing, and I'm even more utopian than Swapna, and I think I need to be because having been in this space for a long time, I think, look, the S curve, when you're at the bottom of the S curve, you think it's flat and it's really going nowhere. But if you look at how some of these revolutions, how quickly they've scaled up and very swiftly left a lot of investors who haven't had the chance to invest in this, just dried up all opportunities to invest. I think we are at the inflection point for a number of these sectors. So, and this is something I told a fellow investor also. Look, we are early stage venture investors. Our job is to take on risk. So let's take the risk and invest.
And can I just add on that utopia piece? Great. On adding on the utopia piece, I mean, just look at media. Media is a good sort of reflection of what's happening in the ecosystem. 18 months back, you would just not hear the word climate tech in the country. It did not exist. And after we've started building, we've started talking, I have in last 12 months seen every large fund in the country saying, look, I will invest 10% in climate. So the FOMO is real, right? VC as a business is about FOMO. So I feel that investors will show up. If deals show up, if capital shows up, everyone will sort of come together. But I think, which is to Mridula's point, that point has happened and hopefully it's a hockey stick from here.
Ankit, I want to put you on the spot, not that this is a conversation about investors versus founders, but both our co-panelists have said a few things. During your journey, did you tear your hair out? Did you ask for philanthropic checks? Did your investors push you, nudge you? Did you actually go out and tell them, I'm sorry, I'm a social venture and stuff may not happen? What was your journey? And what was the role of all of these partners who are, I didn't know, also partners in your crime? What's the role they played?
I raised my first check back in 2017. At that point in time, climate tech and all this was not even a word. So I didn't raise money by saying that I am a social impact enterprise or things like that. That is one. Having said that, see, pre-seed and seed money is plenty. You can get a lot of grants from the government, from incubators like yours, and you can at least kickstart. Series A is still there. But after that, above a 10 million check, in India, I think there's a dearth of it. And that is what the climate tech space really needs. Because after that, you will have to go to a US or a UK to raise funds. And there what happens is, see, when you've raised money from Indian VCs up till a Series A, your cap table would have been diluted way enough. And now when you go to a US VC, over there, for the same quantum of money, they would have maybe diluted a fraction of that. So now you are then fighting those American companies who have better shareholdings and everything, and where you want to go up till a Series D, plan maybe a 100 million round, even more than that. So that is a long-term horizon that we'll have to look up to. I would say the ecosystem is not there yet, but maybe 2-3 years down the lane, it might be there.
I think at least I would imagine for a large part of the audience in the climate tech space, I think what you're saying would be actually very encouraging. If you're saying early stage, seed, pre-series, even up to Series B, is not a difficult journey if the story is right, I think is very encouraging.
Yeah, 100%. Like, for example, for making the leather material that I'm talking about, we got a lot of, what we did was we went to a lot of business plan competitions. And we got up till 1 crore from just business plan competitions in the country itself. So, and this is like free money.
Damn cool.
So
Damn smart.
that's an easy way out, and there is all of that can be done. So up till pre-series, like pre-series A, and the money is there, you can raise it.
I want to change gears a little and maybe continue with you. And being an entrepreneur, maybe if you look at the sustainability climate space with a much broader lens, your perspective on the role of government, on the role of policy. Swapna believes at least in some clusters a lot of work has been done and probably it is visible. But what's the way you engage and the way you look at the sector, what's been the role, what else can be done?
See, there is a lot of talk. And now I would say, see, for the government, there are certain sectors which are very important where policy changes happen. But for example, if you want to really go and talk to the government, there are no mechanisms. Like for example, even the climate tech space, there is no forum as such where the climate tech founders or investors, founders would say this is the real policy change that we require. So first, I think we need to align ourselves get to that level because the government won't be able to make any change until there is recommendation from us. Or there will be recommendation from certain heads in like, well, like for example, maybe the top 5 startups doing well. They would give certain inputs and that would be done. But to have a holistic approach in terms of policy change, I think first we need to align, get a forum, talk amongst ourselves that this is the change, what is required, actual change in terms of the policy, and that then only it can be presented to the government. Otherwise, XYZ going to the government and asking for change it will fall on deaf ears.
Is that happening? Is there some momentum in getting the sector together?
So I think some
Is there a gossip?
sectors, like Ankit was saying, I think mobility is often spoken and lots of being done. I see a lot around with WRI, etc., around water, some noises being made, some conversations started happening. Now I see Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change also getting active, reaching out to us to seek opinion. So some of those ministries have started getting active. But again, to Mridula's point, a lot of this is over last 12 to 18 months. If you ask me that was this existent past, really not.
But that's fair, isn't it? Even if there is recent momentum, that's good momentum.
So I see some momentum in the circles we walk in. For example, the easiest way to think about it maybe is this year's budget. I lost count of number of times they said the word green, right? So it was clearly saying that, look, green is happening. Now the fact is, the more you say it, more infrastructure will appear around it. And I guess the more infrastructure will appear, more what you call picks and shovels businesses will come in to enable those, right? So I think some of those is happening in terms of laying broad plans. But I think if you think there is a need for a forum to get those conversations going between startup and the government, I think those are of course possible.
I will change gears again. You started off also by saying corporates are sleeping at the wheel, and I wrote it down furiously. There is a lot of energy and attention on the broader ESG paradigm, both from within corporates and also from capital markets to look at corporates who have an ESG priority beyond a top line, bottom line priority. Is that an opportunity for the entrepreneurial environment? Is there a threat for an entrepreneurial environment? Are they mutually exclusive? Much like what we spoke about academia and industry, there is a lot of opportunity to get fundamental innovation out of that momentum itself. Or so I would believe. How are you seeing it?
I think it's a pure opportunity. So if you ask me, what does an enterprise care about? Either his revenue or his bottom line or his shareholder. Now here is a shareholder which is saying, look, I need you to do all the right things as we work towards climate, and ESG is becoming priority. Now ES and G is very, very different. So of course G has to be table stakes. There's no way it can't be table stakes. S is what you create in a country of our size. If you're not creating social, I mean, it's just irresponsible, right? Then coming to environment, I think what's happening there is a lot of push towards making these organizations responsible is a great news for startup ecosystem, because now they know they need to get innovation in-house. They know they can't build innovation in-house, which means they know I have to go partner with startup ecosystem. What that essentially lends it is to GTM opportunities, market linkages, sandboxing, conversation.
Are you seeing signs of that happening?
We have invested in 2 companies, and one company is doing a vertical scope 3 emission platform. Now, all of those who understand scope 3, it's the hardest to measure. Most of it is with the hard to abate industries. Most of it has been sent to this part of the world by the richer nations. And there's no way to measure it. Everything is today pen and paper, hard to record, there's no accountability. We have invested in a company which is actually building a platform to make it more accountable, to monitor it, to make it more reliable. The second company we have invested is actually doing it in chemicals industry. Chemical is both upstream and downstream. How do you make the accountability happen? And the reason we took a bet is we saw the writing on the wall that enterprises have to adopt it. There is no way enterprises cannot adopt it.
Fascinating. Mridula, I'm hoping I'm not echoing. I would like to come to you. When you spoke, you did say that there's a lot of activity in the EV space, but some of the other clusters are a little underserved. Help us understand. Where do you see lesser attention, and what's the role for the rest of us to bring in entrepreneurial innovation energy to those clusters?
No, thank you for that. You're not echoing that much this time, so I could hear what you said. So the sector closest to my heart, which I think we need to solve, is water. And you're not seeing having said that, I've invested in 2, 3 startups this year itself, indirectly dealing with water. But, I think we need to take it on front and center. And we're not seeing that, and there are reasons for that also. The second sector, which we absolutely need entrepreneurial energy.
Okay. While we bring her back, we do have a couple of minutes for some questions from the audience. If there are thoughts, we'll have to keep it short. We are between us and lunch. Please, go ahead. I'll repeat the question if the mic is coming down. Yeah.
Ankit, you mentioned that there are money for the seed fund, like kind of thing. I agree to that. But even getting Series A is not that easy for us because we need a capital. When you are doing a tech startup, I'm Dr. Vanita. I'm doing products for converting waste to energy, both in biomethane and biohydrogen. So biohydrogen is still not talked about when we are talking about green hydrogen. We have national mission. So I am talking to the government. Also, I am going to various forums to just educate people that this is also one of the way to work on. So there are things, but getting capital like for setting up these products, manufacturing, because these are innovative products and there are no contract manufacturers available. So it's still difficult. How you are telling it that you can get it into Series A? Because I'm finding it very difficult.
Yeah, so see, it again depends. One first. So when I say series, up till series A, it is still there in the market. And see, raising capital is difficult. It's not very easy. One. But if you do the right side of things and approach the right set of people, like there would be certain investors who would be interested in the field that you're working upon. And if you hit those right investors and the model makes sense, I'm sure you would get money.
And can I just add to that? I think there's a misconception that all problems can be solved with equity, right? There are different forms of capital. So there is grant, there's working capital, there is teaching assistance, etc. So you should look at different pools and not just look at equity as one pool.
That's a powerful thought. Yes, you had a question.
Sapna and Ankit can respond.
A mic closer.
Apart from EV, what could be the other opportunities in the climate tech opportunity we can see?
So there are many. One, the biggest I would say is circular economy. And second is, I think, clean air as well. In a country like ours, they can be two very solid opportunities. And one thing that Mridula ma'am, I suppose, would add in the list is we're not looking at forests in the climate tech sector at all. So there is a very, very solid or inherent need to startups to emerge in that space because forest, at least in India, is a government controlled asset. So how do we maneuver around it and build startups around it is also will solve a lot of challenges.
Excuse me.
In one area I would love to see entrepreneurs solve for is energy storage. We are all working towards renewable, but I think the challenge is on-grid, off-grid, and if there is a way to manage that, it will solve a lot of problems.
We will take one last question.
I had
Yeah,
a question.
Yeah, I am Sitaram. We are into recycling special types of paper waste that are getting into landfills and also upcycling some agro-fiber waste into pulp and paper. In terms of funding, when you say investing, can the R&D that goes into it can also be taken as can you also take that cost into account and start investing early, even as equity, not necessarily as grant? Seeing the potential of that maybe few months down the line or a year down the line, and would you be ready to invest in projects like this if you see potential in terms of profit making at a later stage?
So I think there is science risk funding available. There is a lot of pre-series A seed money for the kind of the R&D risk you are talking that's available actually in the country. I have seen BIRAC done some great. Go ahead.
So I'll give you an example. So first of all, you're sitting in Bangalore. So Social Alpha is known for this. they take very risky bets in terms of tech innovations in the climate space. Now, second is there is BioRack. We got around 50 lakhs grant from them just to develop a module. Then there is CMAP. There are so many bodies who actually fund such kind of innovations. And see, also fundraising is about storytelling. It is not just about the product or something that you're doing. It is about how you're able to sell the dreams, like to your own family, to the employees, and to the investors. So that is what will make the cut, I believe.
Thank you.
I think we will have to wrap for now. Some of our panelists do have to run, but the rest would be available for conversation after this. You can grab them for lunch. This has been a tough but fascinating conversation. Clearly, the space is intractable, but clearly the space has so many opportunities to, if I may say, maneuver, and for all of us to come together to make a change happen. Thank you so much for your time. I've enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you so much, Ganesh. Great session. I do echo your sentiments. Tough and fascinating session indeed.